Ever had to confront someone older than you and stand your ground?
Imagine sitting at your own Sunday table, the one you've set 100 times with that chipped china from your grandma, passing the mashed potatoes while your grown daughter leans in and hisses words that slice deeper than any knife. You're not part of this family. Leave. The room freezes, forks hover, and you, the woman who's scraped and saved to build everything they take for granted, force a sad smile and whisper back, "Mark this day." You didn't just push away your mother. You pushed away your fortune. 10 days drag by like a bad dream, and then your phone lights up with her sobs, pulling you into a tale where family secrets unravel like poorly knit scarves, revenge brews subtle and sharp as aged whiskey. And every choice leaves you questioning if the ties that bind are worth the cuts they leave behind. So settle in, because this story from my life in suburban Ohio will grip you with its raw truths about love, loss, and the fortunes we gamble away in a single heated moment. The aroma of pot roast filled Grandma's old dining room in our quiet corner of Dayton, Ohio, where the lace curtains fluttered just enough to let in slivers of afternoon sun on that crisp autumn Sunday. And I remember thinking how everything looked so perfectly normal as we all settled around the table with plates clinking and laughter bubbling up from my brother Jack's latest fishing tale about reeling in a bass that nearly yanked him into the Miami River. But deep down I knew the undercurrents were swirling like the gravy I'd spent hours simmering on the stove from a family recipe passed down through generations of hardworking women who turned scraps into sustenance. Sarah, my daughter, with her sharp bob haircut and that perpetual furrow between her brows from too many late nights at her marketing job in Columbus, where she chased deadlines for ad campaigns that promised the world but delivered only stress, sat across from me picking at her carrots with a fork that scraped the plate like an accusation waiting to be voiced, while her father Tom lounged at the head like he still owned the place, even though our divorce papers had yellowed 5 years back after his affair with Linda turned our marriage into a battlefield of whispered arguments and slammed doors that echoed through the nights when Sarah was just a teenager navigating high school drama. His new wife Linda simpered beside him with her fake lashes batting like butterfly wings in a hurricane, and that know-it-all smirk that always made me want to roll my eyes right out of my head toward the ceiling fan whirring lazily overhead, pretending to stir the air that already felt thick with unspoken resentments from years of holidays where I'd hosted everyone despite the ache of being sidelined in my own home. I'd built my little empire from nothing more than determination and a sewing machine humming in the garage after Tom walked out claiming I was too buried in hobbies to notice his wandering eyes, turning those handmade quilts into an online craft supply business that now shipped nationwide to hobbyists and small shops alike, keeping me in a cozy bungalow with a bank account swollen from smart investments and late-night order fulfillments that could buy this whole block if I ever felt the whimsical urge to play Monopoly with real estate. But nobody at that table ever asked about the sweat and solitude behind it. They just expected the checks for Sarah's emergencies, like her latest car down payment that I wired without fanfare, or that overpriced apartment in Columbus she insisted on to escape the small-town vibes she claimed suffocated her dreams. All while I bit my tongue on the pride swelling in my chest from watching her chase ambitions I never had the chance to pursue back when raising a family meant putting aside college for a job at the local mill. As the conversation meandered from Jack's bad luck with bass slipping through his fingers like so many family promises to Linda's latest church bake sale triumph, where she'd won blue ribbons for pies that tasted suspiciously like the ones from the corner bakery, Sarah leaned toward me under the guise of reaching for the rolls steaming in their basket woven from reeds I'd gathered on a family vacation years ago, her breath hot against my ear, carrying the faint scent of the mint gum she chewed to mask the nervousness I now recognized as brewing discontent. She whispered loud enough for the whole room to catch it in that stunned silence that follows a dropped fork clattering to the hardwood floor, "You're not part of this family. Leave." The words hung there heavier than the steam from the roast wafting up to fog the window panes overlooking the backyard, where autumn leaves painted the ground in fiery hues. And I felt every eye swivel my way, with Tom's holding a smug glint like he'd scripted the whole thing during one of their private chats that excluded me, Linda's wide with feigned shock that didn't reach her calculating eyes, and Jack's confused as he chewed slower on a mouthful of potatoes, his fork pausing midair in a moment that stretched the tension taut as a bowstring ready to snap. But I just set down my napkin with hands that barely trembled from the effort of holding back the flood of hurt rising in my throat. Met Sarah's defiant stare that mirrored her father's so eerily it twisted my gut like the knots I'd untied in countless quilt patterns, and smiled that sad, knowing smile I'd practiced in the mirror after too many lonely nights wondering if motherhood ever got easier or just evolved into new forms of quiet heartbreak. "Mark this day," I said softly, my voice carrying clear as a bell over the uneaten pie cooling on the sideboard with its lattice crust cracking like the facade of our family unity. "You didn't just push away your mother, you pushed away your fortune." Nobody spoke after that, the air thick with unspoken accusations about divided loyalties and the money I'd funneled into their lives without strings, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall marking seconds that stretched into eternity as if time itself paused to witness the fracture widening beneath the surface polish of our gathering. As I gathered my purse with its worn leather strap from years of errands and errands more, I stepped out into the chill where leaves skittered across the driveway like fleeing thoughts from a mind unwilling to confront the fallout. Driving home alone with the radio humming some old country tune about lost love and roads not taken that mirrored the path my life had veered onto after the divorce. I replayed the lunch in my mind during that drive through neighborhoods lined with maple trees shedding their colors like regrets, wondering if Sarah would even grasp what I'd meant by fortune. Not just the dollars stacked from years of hustling orders while she partied through college on the funds I provided anonymously to avoid seeming like the meddlesome mom, but the quiet power I'd held back through investments in stocks and properties that now formed a safety net woven tighter than any quilt I'd ever made. By Monday morning, I was back at my desk overlooking the shipping warehouse that employed half the neighborhood kids who'd grown up with Sarah, sorting through emails about expanding to wholesale deals with big box stores that could double my revenue and secure retirements for my loyal team. But a nagging doubt crept in when I glanced at my phone and saw no apology text from her. Just the usual silence that felt louder than her whisper and heavier than the boxes stacking up behind me. That evening, as I sipped tea on my porch watching neighbors mow lawns in the fading light of a sun dipping behind the horizon like a curtain call on normalcy, I decided it was time for a small shift in how I'd always bent over backward. Nothing dramatic like a public scene that would only fuel Linda's gossip mill, just canceling the surprise check I'd planned to slip into her birthday card next month as a witty little reminder that actions had echoes rippling out like stones skipped across the still waters of a pond. If she thought I was out of the family picture, well, maybe she'd missed the frame I provided more than she knew, the financial backbone that had propped up her independence without ever demanding credit. But as I locked up for the night with the house settling around me in creaks and sighs, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with a text from an unknown number warning about Sarah arguing heatedly with Tom at a coffee shop downtown. The words glowing on the screen like a harbinger of storms yet to break, and I paused there in the dim light, heart skipping just a beat, because what if that whisper had unleashed more than she bargained for, pulling threads from a tapestry I'd carefully maintained for decades? Those first few days after the disastrous lunch blurred into a routine of deliberate distraction at the warehouse on the outskirts of Dayton, where the hum of forklifts weaving through aisles stacked high with bolts of fabric and spools of thread became my sanctuary from the echoing whisper that still rang in my ears like a bad melody stuck on repeat, pulling me deeper into the operations of the business I'd nurtured from a kitchen table startup into this bustling hub that employed 20 loyal souls, including a few who'd known Sarah since her diaper days and now joked about her city slicker ways over coffee breaks in the break room with its mismatched chairs and the faint scent of machine oil mingling with fresh brewed Folgers. I dove headfirst into negotiations with a new supplier out in Pennsylvania whose catalogs brimmed with organic cottons and eco-friendly dyes that promised to elevate my craft line into something premium enough for boutique stores along the East Coast, the kind of deal that could slash costs by 15% and inflate margins to fund expansions like the online course platform I'd been mulling over for hobbyists wanting to learn quilting techniques passed down from my own grandmother's calloused hands. But Tom's voice slithered into my thoughts uninvited from our last strained family phone call a month prior, where he dropped hints about stepping in to manage Sarah's finances with his so-called investment savvy that had tanked our joint savings. Back in the day, through one too many get-rich-quick schemes peddled by his bar buddies. It irked me to no end, that presumptuous tone of his, as if the divorce hadn't severed more than just our marriage vows, but also his right to meddle in the life I'd rebuilt brick by financial brick. So I layered a touch of wry revenge into the mix by quietly rerouting a bulk shipment of upholstery-grade fabrics that Tom had bragged about securing for his fledgling side hustle and home redecorating through emails I'd intercepted via a mutual contact in the trade, sending a polite but firm note to the vendor about shifting priorities due to internal reallocations that left his order dangling in limbo, while my warehouse overflowed with premium stock ready for the holiday rush. Flashbacks to the raw underbelly of our divorce assaulted me during those quieter afternoons when the crew thinned out for lunch and I sat alone at my desk overlooking the loading docks where trucks idled like patient beasts. Memories of the night Tom confessed his affair with Linda over cold Chinese takeout spread across our scarred oak table in the kitchen that still smelled of the spaghetti I'd burned in distraction that evening, his words tumbling out in a rush of excuses about feeling neglected amid my growing focus on the sewing business that started as a way to fill the void of empty nest fears, but blossomed into a lifeline after he packed his bags for her apartment downtown. I'd seen the signs months earlier, the late work hours stretching into dawn with alibis as flimsy as the cheap ties he bought to impress her, his compliments drying up like creek beds in a drought while my confidence withered under the weight of raising Sarah through her rebellious teen years marked by slammed doors and eye rolls that now seemed prophetic in light of her lunch outburst, yet back then I'd chosen silence, channeling the betrayal into secret savings from early online sales of quilt patterns inspired by Ohio's rolling hills and family lore, building a nest egg he never suspected because my pride as the steadfast wife kept me from waving financial independence like a red flag that might have ended things sooner. Now that hidden fortune murmured possibilities of deeper leverage if the family fractures widen further. A quiet arsenal amassed from years of solitary hustling while Sarah navigated college parties on the tuition dollars I wired anonymously through third-party accounts to avoid the label of overbearing mom hovering over her newfound freedom in Columbus. Sarah's indifference post-lunch cut sharper than expected when a full week slipped by without so much as an emoji-laden text apology lighting up my screen. Her social media feeds instead bursting with snapshots of her laughing at rooftop bars with colleagues who looked too polished for the gritty marketing world she complained about in rare calls. Those images twisting a knot in my chest that blended reluctant pride in her social ease with the sharp pang of exclusion, especially as I recalled the countless times I'd covered her emergencies, like that busted transmission on her first car after a joyride gone wrong or the rent shortfall from overspending on concert tickets to bands I'd never heard of. By Thursday morning, as sunlight slanted through the warehouse windows highlighting dust motes dancing like unspoken regrets, uncertainty began to gnaw at the edges of my resolve when my assistant Carla, the no-nonsense widow, who'd been with me since the garage days, mentioned overhearing industry gossip at a trade show about Tom's new venture sputtering like an old engine low on oil. Whispers of unpaid invoices and client complaints that suggested Sarah might be entangled in his web once more through some collaborative project she'd vaguely mentioned in passing. I pushed the worry aside with a light chuckle to myself about the cosmic irony of it all, me, cast as the outsider at my own family table, thriving in this empire of threads and needles while they chased shadows of success that evaporated under scrutiny. Yet the growing conflict simmered beneath the surface like gravy left too long on the stove, threatening to scorch everything if left unattended. That evening, after locking the warehouse gates against the encroaching dusk where streetlights flickered on like hesitant confessions, I retreated to my bungalow to sift through old files in the study lined with shelves of fabric swatches and ledgers, chronicling every milestone from first $100 sale to the multi-million milestone last quarter. unearthing a faded snapshot of Sarah as a wide-eyed toddler perched on my hip at the county fair with cotton candy staining her cheeks pink and her tiny fist clutching the hem of my sundress in a grip that spoke of unbreakable trust now frayed by years and choices. The image softened the edges of my hurt just enough to entertain the notion of bridging the gap with a casual outreach, perhaps a shared recipe for that pot roast to remind her of Sundays untainted by drama. But before I could dial her number, the phone pinged with an anonymous email from what appeared to be a concerned mutual acquaintance in Columbus, detailing how Sarah's position at the ad agency teetered on the brink following a catastrophic client presentation derailed by Tom's unsolicited input on a partnership deal gone sour, the account's details spilling out in a narrative that painted her desperation in stark relief and left me frozen in the lamplight, staring at the glowing words as the weight of impending dilemmas settled heavy on my shoulders like an uninvited guest at a solitary dinner. The anonymous email lingered in my inbox like an unwelcome guest who overstayed their welcome at a family reunion, its words detailing the unraveling of Sarah's career at the Columbus ad agency through a series of missteps influenced by Tom's overconfident meddling in her professional pitches that had alienated key clients and left her scrambling for alibis to her bosses who valued results over excuses rooted in paternal advice gone awry, pulling my focus away from the warehouse routines where orders for fall craft kits piled up like autumn leaves outside the loading bays and forcing me to confront the tangled web of loyalties that had ensnared her life since the divorce when I'd stepped back to let her choose sides without the weight of my interventions tipping the scales. I wrestled with the impulse to intervene throughout that long weekend, my fingers itching over the keyboard during solitary brunches at the kitchen table where sunlight streamed through windows overlooking the backyard garden I'd planted with perennials that bloomed defiantly year after year, much like the resilience I'd cultivated after Tom's departure. Headlines in the local paper about small business owners navigating economic dips serving as ironic companions to my internal debate on whether to wire funds anonymously to cushion her fall or allow the natural consequences of her choices to teach the lessons I'd learned the hard way through years of bootstrapping without a safety net from anyone but my own grit. Instead of direct action that might undermine the boundaries I'd finally asserted post-lunch, I opted for a subtler form of witty reckoning by composing an anonymous tip to an industry newsletter circulated among craft and decor professionals, outlining in veiled terms the pitfalls of unreliable suppliers tied to Tom's network without dropping names that could trace back to me. The piece circulating by Monday morning and sparking a flurry of inquiries that had his phone lines lighting up with irate contacts while my business sailed smoothly on verified partnerships. The satisfaction of that clever exposure warming me like the steam rising from my morning coffee as I imagined his flustered explanations falling on deaf ears in boardrooms where reputation mattered more than charm. Dilemmas deepened as I delved further into the situation through discreet online searches and a call to Jack, who grumbled about overhearing Tom's boasts at a neighborhood card game about roping Sarah into his latest venture, a home decor line peddling knockoff quilts that shamelessly echoed my early designs but lacked the authenticity woven from personal stories and quality threads, uncovering her mounting credit card statements funneled toward covering his startup costs under the guise of family investment that now ballooned into debts threatening her credit score and stability in a city where rent hikes outpace salaries for mid-level marketers like her. It struck me then how she'd prioritized his validation over the steady support I'd offered quietly through the years. The man who'd abandoned us for Linda's superficial affections and her circle of social climbers who hosted brunches laced with passive-aggressive jabs about single women's limitations. Yet I couldn't shake the audience's potential disapproval of my decision to withhold the bailout that a simple transfer could provide, viewing it perhaps as a mother's selfishness masked as tough love when the easier path would mend fences with generosity rather than letting pride dictate the terms of reconciliation. Uncertainty thickened the air around my bungalow that week, blending with the scent of impending rain as clouds gathered over the Ohio skyline visible from my porch swing, where I rocked gently while pondering the growing conflict that simmered like a pot about to boil over. Threats of Tom's casual mentions to Jack about reclaiming family assets during backyard barbecues hinting at designs on The inheritance I'd structured through airtight trusts with my lawyer to shield the fruits of my labor from his opportunistic reaches ever since the divorce settlement that left me with the house and business, but him with lingering resentments over alimony checks he'd squandered on weekend getaways. A touch of humor lightened my brooding as I pictured Tom's face flushing redder than the barn paint on his latest flip project upon reading the newsletter exposé. His empire of half-baked ideas crumbling under the weight of scrutiny like cookies baked too long in an oven of his own making. But the interpersonal tensions escalated when Sarah's text arrived midweek, a terse, "Hey mom, how's everything going work-wise?" That reeked of fishing for favors without addressing the elephant of her whisper. Still lumbering between us, drawing me into a vortex of what-if scenarios where confronting her head-on might shatter the fragile peace, or opening the floodgates could invite more manipulation from the ex-family unit she'd aligned with. By Friday afternoon, as a light drizzle pattered against the warehouse windows, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor of parked cars and delivery vans, I unearthed a deeper layer to the deception in reviewing old bank records tucked away in a locked drawer of my desk. Statements revealing not just the tuition payments I'd funneled for her college escapades, but a forgotten entry for adoption facilitation fees from nearly 3 decades ago when Tom and I, struggling through early marriage woes amplified by infertility heartaches, had quietly selected her from an agency portfolio in a sterile Cleveland office, hoping to forge the family we dreamed of against the odds of our mismatched ambitions. The discovery left me reeling in the quiet of my office, where the hum of the crew's chatter filtered through the door like distant thunder, hands trembling slightly as I refiled the documents, because revealing that truth now could redefine her sense of belonging in ways that either healed the rift or widened it into an abyss, her biological origins a secret buried to protect her from the complexities of our choices back when love was blind to the fractures it concealed. Just as I composed myself with a deep breath scented by the vanilla candle flickering on the windowsill, my phone vibrated insistently on the desk with a voicemail notification from Sarah, her voice threading the line between composure and collapse as she murmured about needing to talk urgently regarding some unspecified trouble at work and home. The faint hitch in her tone hinting at tears held back like a dam on the verge of breaking, and I pressed play once more, heart pounding with the anticipation of what confessions might spill forth in the impending confrontation that loomed larger than the storm clouds rolling in from the west. Sarah's voicemail replayed in my thoughts like a scratched record skipping through the weekend hours that blurred into one another under the gray skies hanging low over Dayton, as if mirroring the emotional overcast settling in my bungalow where the scent of chamomile tea, steeped too long in the pot, offered little comfort against the pull of her voice threading vulnerability with the remnants of pride that had fueled her defiant whisper at lunch, urging me to respond with the maternal warmth she'd spurned yet now seemed to crave in fragments of her message that hinted at cascading troubles from job instability to the undercurrents of Tom's unreliable guidance, without spelling out the full desperation that left her reaching out after weeks of radio silence. I grappled with the dilemma of engagement throughout those rainy days, pacing the living room floorboards creaking underfoot like the shifting foundations of our fractured bond while rain drummed against the panes overlooking the sodden garden where perennials bowed under the weight of downpours, much as I felt bowed by the choice between extending an olive branch that might invite further rejection or maintaining the emotional distance that served as my armor forged in the fires of divorce and dismissal. A stance that outsiders peering in might condemn as unyielding cruelty from a mother who should prioritize healing over holding grudges, especially when the simplicity of a reassuring call could dissolve the barriers built from years of one-sided sacrifices. The warehouse called me back on Monday, with its familiar rhythm of crates being shifted and voices calling out inventory checks that grounded me in the tangible successes of the empire I'd sculpted from solitude, where I channeled the inner turmoil into a strategic pivot, announcing exclusive partnerships with sustainable artisans across the Midwest that not only distanced my supply chain from Tom's tainted connections, but catapulted my brand into national spotlights through features in lifestyle magazines touting ethical crafting as the next wave for busy professionals seeking handmade authenticity amid corporate drudgery. The witty undercurrent of this revenge unfolding as invitations for keynote speeches at trade expos flooded my inbox, while whispers reached me via Jack about Tom's upholstery outfit scrambling for scraps in the wake of boycotted vendors who now favored my vetted network. Growing conflict layered itself thicker when I finally confided fragments of the adoption secret to my lawyer during a midday appointment in his downtown office lined with leather-bound volumes and the faint aroma of polished wood that evoked stability amid chaos. The words spilling out as I recounted how Tom and I had pored over agency files in a fluorescent-lit room 32 years ago, selecting Sarah's newborn photo from a stack of hopeful possibilities not born of biological longing but a deliberate act to anchor our wavering marriage with a promise of shared purpose against the backdrop of his job losses and my unfulfilled aspirations, deferred for domesticity. That revelation hung in the air between us like an uncharted territory on a map I'd drawn for my future. The lawyer nodding sagely as he advised on trust amendments that layered protections around the fortune encompassing not just liquid assets, but properties and intellectual properties from quilt designs patented in my name. Yet the ambiguity of withholding this truth from Sarah gnawed at me during the drive home through slick streets reflecting taillights like fractured memories, because unveiling her origins now could either mend the tear in our tapestry by affirming my chosen love or exacerbate the rifts by recasting me as an imposter in the family narrative she'd constructed with Tom's selective storytelling. Uncertainty cloaked my evenings as Sarah's follow-up texts arrived laced with increasing urgency pleas for a quick catch-up that I parried with non-committal replies about busy schedules and vague well wishes, each evasion stacking the tension higher like boxes teetering in the warehouse loft ready to topple under the slightest nudge. And I sensed the audience's instinctive recoil at my calculated withholding of the empathy she sought, viewing it perhaps as a petty inversion of her cruelty when vulnerability called for vulnerability in return, yet I justified it inwardly as the necessary space to reclaim agency after being erased from the family script she'd authored in a moment of heated allegiance. A wry humor surfaced in my solitary reflections over dinner plates of reheated lasagna cooling untouched as I envisioned Tom's chagrin at the expo buzz, where my name echoed in hallways he'd once dismissed as women's hobbies. His side ventures sidelined into obscurity while my pivot secured deals that swelled the coffers enough to fund community workshops teaching crafting skills to single parents navigating divorces, much like my own. A subtle jab that empowered others without direct confrontation, but carried the sting of exclusion for those who'd underestimated the depth of my resolve. By Thursday evening, as the rain tapered into a misty haze enveloping the neighborhood where porch lights glowed like beacons in the twilight, I pored over quarterly financials at my desk, illuminated by a gooseneck lamp casting pools of light on spreadsheets projecting growth trajectories that outpaced even my optimistic projections post-lunch. The impending reconciliation teetering on the edge of my thoughts like a conversation left half-finished, and then my phone shattered the quiet with its insistent ring, Sarah's name illuminating the screen accompanied by the unmistakable tremor in her voice as sobs broke through the line before she could form coherent words, her distress crashing over me in waves that demanded I confront the culmination of fortunes pushed away and the truths hovering just beyond utterance. Sarah's sobs cascaded through the phone line that fateful Thursday night as the remnants of the rain pattered softly against my bungalow windows, turning the world outside into a shimmering veil that blurred the outlines of familiar neighborhood homes where families likely gathered around evening meals, oblivious to the emotional tempests brewing in living rooms like mine, her voice fracturing under the weight of admissions that poured out in fragmented bursts detailing the abrupt termination from her ad agency job after a client exodus triggered by Tom's disastrous recommendations on a high-stakes decor partnership that promised commissions but delivered only lawsuits and bounced checks, leaving her professional reputation in tatters amid the competitive Columbus scene where second chances came rarer than honest apologies from ex-husbands. I settled deeper into my armchair with its faded floral upholstery, a relic from pre-divorce thrift store hunts that now cradled me like an old friend. During this torrent of vulnerability, the lamp on the side table casting a warm glow over scattered craft magazines open to articles on resilient entrepreneurship that ironically underscored my own path, while I listened without immediate interruption, allowing her words to unfold like a poorly wrapped gift revealing the desperation beneath the layers of pride she'd clung to since that lunch whisper. The conversation meandered through the wee hours as her pleas intertwined with recriminations that echoed the cruelty of her dismissal, calling me out for my perceived coldness in the weeks following the family fracture, yet I interjected gently with recollections of the unseen lifelines I'd extended, the anonymous tuition transfers during her college benders that kept her enrolled when dropout loomed large, the covert repairs on her vehicles funneled through Jack to maintain her independence. Without the strings of gratitude she might have resented, each disclosure serving as a breadcrumb trail toward the broader fortune of sacrifices I'd amassed, not just in dollars, but in the quiet endurance of single motherhood that reshaped my identity from homemaker to empire builder. Conflict swelled as she beseeched me for a substantial loan to staunch the bleeding debts accrued from propping up Tom's floundering home goods line, where she'd invested savings on his assurances of quick returns only to watch them evaporate in supplier disputes and market slumps that mirrored the volatility of his affections during our marriage, her raw honesty cracking the veneer of the self-assured daughter I'd raised to chase dreams in the big city, yet now reduced to this midnight reckoning, where the audience might inwardly critique my measured pauses as manipulative withholdings when a flood of empathy could wash away the barriers faster than any financial bailout. A thread of wry humor wove through the tension as I quipped about Tom's perennial talent for charming his way into predicaments, then vanishing like a fleeting summer storm, leaving others to mop up the puddles, his light vulgarity in describing Linda's role as the enabler behind his schemes drawing a watery chuckle from her that lightened the air momentarily amid the sobs, allowing us to navigate the minefield of blame with a touch of shared sarcasm born from years of living in his shadow. The impending revenge crystallized in my proposal, not of outright cash that might perpetuate the cycle of dependency she'd fallen into, but a structured opportunity at the warehouse helm of a new marketing division tailored to her skills, with the caveat of earning her keep through hands-on contributions that would immerse her in the grit of the business I'd forged from garage obscurity to national supplier status, a clever maneuver that severed Tom's influence by binding her future to my legacy, while demanding accountability in ways that satisfied the witty justice simmering since her rejection, forcing growth through labor rather than leniency, and sidelining his opportunistic family unit from any further encroachments on her path. Twists unfurled in those final exchanges as I alluded to revisions in my will drafted swiftly after the lunch debacle, layering the fortune with disclosures of the adoption circumstances where Tom and I had embraced her as our own in a deliberate choice. Amid our early marital strains, transforming biological absence into a bond forged by intention and unwavering commitment, the major revelations surfacing like dawn breaking through night clouds to illuminate how I'd architected protections around assets, including the bungalow and intellectual properties from quilt motifs that now generated passive income streams, all calibrated to test loyalties without full transparency, leaving her probing questions unanswered in the ambiguity of family chosen over blood that hinted at deeper secrets without granting closure. As the call wound down with tentative promises of her visiting the warehouse for a tour and discussion of the role, the line falling silent amid the fading rain that left puddles reflecting streetlights like unresolved reflections, I lingered in the armchair pondering the echoes of her voice and the fragile threads of potential reconciliation. What if this sobbing marked the genesis of genuine transformation, pulling her back from the precipice of Tom's deceptions, or did it merely represent another opportunistic pivot masking underlying motives that echoed the lunch betrayal? Inviting contemplation on the true cost of forgiveness in families where fortunes both monetary and emotional dangled as prizes in games of push and pull, forever questioning whether the ties we'd strained could ever weave whole again without the scars of whispered wounds.